danced the wedding pas de deux was during my graduation performance, graduating from the Russian Ballet Academy, or at that time it was called the choreographic school named after Agrippina Vaganova. And I danced it, that was in 1984, when I first danced the wedding pas de deux of Don Quixote. It was with my classmate, who was also graduating, Bakitjan Smagulov. And yes, it was in the Mariinsky Theater. Then 2 years later, I did the full-length ballet with Faruk Ruzimatov as my partner. It was on January 8, I will not forget the date, January 6, 1986. And I was coached for the role by Gabriela Komleva and prepared by to debut as Kitri in Don Quixote. It is like one of the most fun performances to do, but also one of the hardest, because you have to be energetic and like just full of energy, full of love of life for the whole 3 acts of the ballet. And the role requires you to jump. A bit more about the ballet, Don Quixote. It is entitled Don Quixote, but did you know that the character of Don Quixote plays actually not a very small role, but a minor role in the ballet. It is really a ballet that tells us the story of Kitri, the innkeeper's daughter, who is in love with the town barber, Basilio. And Lorenzo, Kitri's father, is a very ambitious man. He wants his daughter, his only daughter, to marry the town's rich guy, okay? This rich guy is called Gamache. And so Lorenzo almost like strikes a deal with Gamache and says, please, marry my daughter. She's available. And of course, Gamache falls in love with her because Kitri is so feisty and pretty. But Basilio and Kitri are very, very much in love. So Kitri has to sort of play along and please her father. And amidst all of this happening in Act 1, Don Quixote enters the town and sees Kitri and mistakes Kitri for Dulcinea. Dulcinea is basically the ideal woman that Don Quixote has promised to try and find in a quest. Of course, Don Quixote is accompanied by his sidekick, Sancho Panza. And so they really just enter the town as visitors. But when Don Quixote sees Kitri, he falls in love with her and mistakes her for Dulcinea. And of course, it creates another big mess because now there's not just 2 men vying for Kitri's hand, but 3. Don Quixote, Gamache, and Basilio. Basilio being Kitri's first and only love. In Act 2, so Act 1 ends with basically Kitri and Basilio running off and evading Gamache and Don Quixote. In Act 2, Kitri and Basilio find themselves in a meadow by a windmill, and they meet a camp of gypsies. And these gypsies dance for them and entertain them in their camp. And then Don Quixote comes along, and of course Kitri at first tries to hide from him, and then they try to humor him. And then Don Quixote mistakes the windmill for a monster that is coming to kidnap and get Dulcinea, Kitri, from him. And so Don Quixote charges the windmill, thinking that it's a monster, and in the process gets hurt gets knocked out, and he falls to the ground and dreams. So, a huge, we call it a classical divertissement, where it is set in Don Quixote's dream, and he is in the middle of all of these dryads, fairy-like creatures, and Cupid, the goddess of love, dancing with Dulcinea, still danced by the same ballerina, by the ballerina who's dancing Kitri, as Dulcinea. And so she dances a classical variation. For this performance, it's actually a different variation from what is normally performed as the Dulcinea variation in Act 2. It's going to be the Natalia Dudinskaya variation, but maybe Renata can tell you more about that. And then, so Act 2 ends with the dream coming to a close and Don Quixote reviving from his waking up from his accident and realizing that it was a dream. Act 3 opens in the tavern where everybody's gathered to have fun, drink and have fun. It's basically a party. And again, Don Quixote comes in. And of course, Gamache, and of course, Lorenzo, and all the other characters. And Kitri is forced to meet and talk to Gamache again. This makes Basilio very jealous, so he comes in, throws Gamache aside, and says to Kitri, "Why are you with Gamache? I love you, I cannot live without you." And he basically fakes a suicide in front of everybody. And Kitri, knowing that Basilio is faking a suicide, she basically goes to her savior, Don Quixote, and asks him, "Can you please give permission for us to marry before the love of my life dies?" And Don Quixote goes to Lorenzo and says, "Let them get married, or else, anyway, the marriage is not going to last for long because the guy's dying." Again, it's a fake suicide. It is a comic ballet. It's a very romantic comic ballet. And so Lorenzo is forced to give his permission. Basilio miraculously wakes up and is completely healthy. And so he is forced, the father is forced to allow them to marry. Which brings us to Act 4, but it's still the continuation of Act 3 in our ballet. It is for the Kitri's wedding, which has one of the highlights of the ballet, which is the wedding parade between Kitri and Basilio. And at the end, Don Quixote sees another vision of Dulcinea walking away from the village, and so he walks away from the village, leaving Kitri married already to Basilio, and the town happily celebrating their marriage. That, in a nutshell, is the ballet Don Quixote. All right? Okay. So, any questions so far?